Exodus chapter 20. All right, so this is the reception of the Ten Commandments. This is taking place in the third new moon, so somewhere between 50 to 60 days after Easter, astronomically. Tradition is that it's 50 days after that Easter, after Passover. All right, and this is the giving of the law. And the Pentecost that we celebrate as Catholics is also the giving of the law. It's just the giving of the new law. There's a lot of parallels between the Pentecost of the Old Testament and the Pentecost of the New Testament. Chapter 20. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord, your God. Underline, your God. God is now identifying himself as the God of the Israelites. Previously, it's always been the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. God gives them this law. They say, everything the Lord has spoken, we will do. And now God is saying, I am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Stage one monotheism. Okay? It's not acknowledging that the other gods are legitimate and real, but you're speaking to a pagan audience. You shall not make for yourselves a graven image. All right, so we have to spend time on this because there's some confusion out there in the world with the Ten Commandments. I'm just going to explain some things. First off, so the first thing to explain is, like, the numbering of the Ten Commandments isn't the world's biggest issue in, like, theological debate, okay? But there are some errors and heresies that have come up from this reading this passage. So the word graven in Hebrew is pasel. And every time the word pasel is used in the Old Testament, it is in direct reference to an idol. And also, in the Septuagint is the translation of the Hebrew, the Old Hebrew books of the Bible into Greek, and it took place around like 100 BC. Okay, so every translation comes with an interpretation, and in the Septuagint, the way that the Hebrews translated pasel in this text was idol. So the Jews, like 100 years before the birth of Christ, recognized and understood this passage in reference to idols. There have been some iconoclast heresies that have come out of this passage. So iconoclasm is the destruction of images. It's believing that in Christianity there should be absolutely no imagery of God, no imagery of anything religious. And it comes from looking at this command that you shall not make for yourself a graven image. And as we're going to see, that the rest of the context of this passage is clearly referring to idols. And every time this word is used, it's referring to pagan idols. This is a prohibition on polytheism. So Calvin divided these commandments into two separate commands. You have to have the God who brings you out of the house of bondage, and then there's also a prohibition on making any religious imagery. And so from that, you have like this huge iconoclast movement in Geneva, Switzerland, where they like remove all the religious imagery. So let's continue reading, and I'll circle back around to this as it comes up. or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Why? Verse 5, you shall not bow down to them or serve them. So clearly it's referring to the act of making an idol something that you're going to worship, not just a religious image. For I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God. Again, more that stage 1 theme of monotheism, of God is jealous because you have to be with me, not the other gods. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and the 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You got to keep the Sabbath day set apart, right? Remember, holy is to be set apart. How do you do it? 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day it's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, or your son, or your daughter, or your manservant, or your maidservant, so on and so forth. Da 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 da. You guys know the 10 Commandments, right? You have them memorized? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, they're here. All right, so this is where we get the 10 Commandments from. Yes, May?
So it's wrong to be jealous, or like you shouldn't be jealous. So, like God says he's a jealous God.
Yeah.
So does that make jealousy okay in some respects, or is jealousy always wrong?
Yeah, so when you talk about words, there's univocal words, equivocal words, and analogous words, right? And words can have a variety of meanings. So in the context where God's saying he's a jealous God, what is jealousy? Jealousy means this thing has to be mine, and you cannot have it. So in the general social milieu, jealousy is typically bad, okay? Because it's a tendency towards some form of pride and selfishness. In the context of God speaking to his people, like, I'm a jealous God, if you start hanging out with other gods, I'm going to get really ticked off. That's totally called for. And same thing, you can make another analogy with like a married couple, all right? Married couples should be jealous spouses. Like, you can't be going around with other men or other women if you're in a marriage, right? So your spouse has a right to like that same sense of jealousy, that you are mine, I'm yours. No one else can enter into this like relationship that we have, or the love of intimacy we have, where you also have to have each other's back in every situation together. Yeah, Sharon.
Does that also apply to like parents and their children? Like parents can be jealous for their children. Same thing as like they can't.
I don't. No, okay. So I would say parents and children is different from the relationship between spouses, and I would say the relationship between the spouse is more important than the relationship with the parent and the child. Not that it's unimportant, but if you don't have the relationship with the spouses like ironed out and in a wholesome, healthy way, it usually from there spills over some issues with the relationship of the parent and the child. And also, it's not like, parents can let their kids go hang out with other people, but like, there's something more intimate in regards to who you confide with when you're in a marriage relationship. Okay. And I think sometimes, like, it is possible for, I'm not going to go, whatever. Ask me about parenting when you're like 20, then I can go into that. It's like, it's possible for parents to be overjealous with their kids, I guess. I just don't want you taking what I say and then going, I'm like, I hate you, mom and dad, you're being overjealous. Probably not what's happening, but it's possible. It's possible to have that excess as a parent. Okay, so verse 13, just the 10 commandments are given. We're going to jump ahead to verse 22. And the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me. All right, so not only do you have to worship me, I don't even want to see a pantheon. Okay, so note this is a ban on pantheon. They're banned from worshiping other gods. And because the Israelites are a little hard-headed and slow, let's be explicit, no pantheon. You can't say you're worshiping Yahweh and Apis. Yes? Sure. Nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold, verse 24, an altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. So there's this foreshadowing here of God saying, where I cause my name to be remembered, where I end up doing this, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to bless you. Because there's going to be prescriptions on where the Israelites can worship God, and it's going to be confined to a geographical location. And they're not in the Holy Land yet. They haven't conquered Jerusalem, but Jerusalem's going to become the site of the temple, and it's going to become, that's where God makes his name known. But because chronologically that hasn't happened yet, this is just God letting them know, where I make my name known, that's where you're going to have to do this worship. Part of the reason for that is because if you go to Jerusalem and conduct the worship, you're following the proper rituals. Pagans like to just go find the highest place closest to them, because geographically they're close to the sky, so they think they're close to God and being heard, and they're going to do their own little weird occult practices. So it's like, imagine if every family just started trying to do its own mass in its own house. Like, what kind of chaos that would cause in terms of liturgical consistency and theology being taught. Exodus chapter 21 through 23 is a commentary on the Ten Commandments. So we're not going to go through these chapters, but that's what it is. Basically, it's a commentary on the Ten Commandments. Jump ahead to chapter 22, verse 29. The second half of verse 29, we get another reference to those firstborn sons. The firstborn sons you shall give to me. All right, so part of this original covenant, the firstborn sons of the nation of Israel are going to be consecrated specifically to Yahweh. And now we're going to jump ahead to chapter 23, verse 14. And this is where God gives the commands for the annual feasts. So I want you to make three important notes here. Passover equals the barley harvest. Or for shorthand notes, you could just do Passover equals barley. Pentecost equals wheat. And then the Feast of Booths.
Feast of what?
Booths. We could just call it like the fruit harvest. So the festal cycle of the Israelites is tied with their agrarian society and agrarian culture. So when the time of the year comes and it's the Passover, barley is ready to be harvested. And so you're having this celebration during the time of plenty when the barley is harvested. You then go into the planting season for your wheat. 50 days later, you hit the Pentecost, and it's time to harvest the wheat for the year. So again, you're entering into the time of abundance with this. And then the Feast of Booths happens in the fall, and the fall is when you harvest your fruits, all right? The fall is when the grapes are ready, the apples are ready, okay, what have you. And it's called the Feast of Booths because when you would go out and it's time for harvest, you only got so much daylight to work with, and you're not like on a tractor. Okay, and you got to bring this food in before you can't just leave it out there and let it go bad. So what they would do is during the harvest seasons, they would set up tents and they would just live out in the fields during the harvest time. And so they wake up in the booth, in the tent, go out, do their harvesting. They don't even bother to go home because it's like, you could be walking a mile back to your house. Okay, you just crash in your tent, and it's this little fun festival time where everyone's crashing in tents and working together in the fields harvesting their food. All right, so chapter 23, verse 14. 3 times in the year you shall keep a feast to me. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. As I commanded you, you shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days at the appointed time of the month of Abib, for in it you came out of Egypt. So the feast of unleavened bread, that is Passover. None shall appear before me empty-handed. You shall keep the feast of harvest, of the first fruits of your labor, of what you sow in the field. That is the feast of Pentecost. The feast of harvest. It's a reference to Pentecost. You shall keep the feast of ingathering at the end of the year. That's the Feast of Booths, also known as the Feast of Tabernacles, because tabernacle and booth, they're interchangeable terms. Yeah.
What was Pentecost again?
Pentecost is the Feast of Harvest. Passover is unleavened bread. Feast of Booths is the ingathering at the end of the year. For the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the year, also make a note to Deuteronomy chapter 16. More about that feast is explained in Deuteronomy chapter 16. Yes, Asheron?
So, do we, like in the Catholic Church, we still practice the Feast of Booths? Or so we have Pentecost and Passover?
Yeah. Yeah, so in the Catholic Church, the old covenant's been fulfilled in Christ, and we don't practice it. We have like something better to celebrate than these old feasts. So I would say there isn't like the equivalent or the new Catholic form of the Feast of Booths, but we have like far greater feasts to replace them, like Feast of Christ the King. Like Jesus, there's nothing wrong with these feasts, right? Jesus, as a Jew, he would have observed and celebrated these feasts. We also know Jesus observed and celebrated Hanukkah, which is a feast that comes later because it's about the cleansing of the temple. The temple doesn't exist yet, so it's not part of this cycle yet. So like there's nothing wrong about remembering, for example, the story of the Maccabees cleansing out the temple and reclaiming, like clearing out the pagans and reestablishing the worship of the one true God in the BC area. That's totally fine. But I think it'd be misplaced to, what you want to realize as a Christian is that there's far greater feasts now to celebrate than that. Like Christmas, the incarnation, is like an infinitely more memorable moment than that other moment in history, but it's still something that's okay to acknowledge, okay? It's what you don't want to fall into, though, is what's known as the Judaizer heresy, where you try to like pick up Jewish customs for the sake of following Jewish customs when they're no longer applicable because the old law's been fulfilled, if that makes sense. So, I mean, like, yeah, the Old Testament's great. These feasts are wonderful things. We have a new Passover. We have a new Pentecost. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging the old Passover or the old Pentecost. Like we do that in the church in the readings on those days. But you want to you want to live out the fullness of the faith rather than like having a temptation of like narrowly focusing down some Judaizing rabbit hole. If that makes sense. We're at verse 17. 3 times in the year shall all your males appear before the Lord God. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, nor let the fat of my feast remain until the morning. The first of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. All right, you can make a note here to Genesis 18:8. This is where kosher law starts to develop. The serious practicing Orthodox Jews can't have like cheeseburgers, okay, because you're having cow meat and then dairy product together, and they're not supposed to be mixed because of this passage. In Genesis 18:8, Abraham gives God a meal of curds and meat, and God eats it. So why is there this ban on boiling a kid in its mother milk? Well, it sounds pretty weird because this is a pagan practice because pagans are weird. So the pagan ritual would be you have this newborn baby and then you milk the mom, and like the new baby is new life and the mom's milk is the source of life. And then I'm going to cook the baby in the mother's milk and then we're going to eat it and then we're going to like take in this life force. It's like life. Okay. And God's telling, it's just, there's so much in here that's God telling the Israelites, don't be like the people around you. Don't be like yes.
Side note, but the dill pickles have kosher on the thing.
Yeah, I guess they're kosher.
But like, what makes them kosher?
They don't violate any of the kosher laws for
So,
Israel.
That,
Yes,
Can I use the bathroom?
sure.
What does this taste Jewish?
No, it's just making a kosher product. You guys like know that there's kosher labels on food?
Yeah.
It's okay. I don't know the history of kosher dill pickles, May. I just know that kosher means it's safe to eat. All right, verse 20. Behold, I sent an angel before you. Underline that. I sent an angel before you. Make a note to Joshua chapter 5, verse 13. This angel appears to Joshua before he goes to Jericho. But God is promising Israel, look, I'm your God now. And my angel's going to go before you and handle all the battles. Yes. Chapter 5, verse 13 of the book of Joshua. Joshua chapter 5, verse 13. Behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place which I have prepared. Give heed to him and listen to his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. That's a weird line. That's also like part of the reason why in commentaries from the church fathers, they say like, when there's an angel acting on behalf of God, like this unnamed angel, like speculation, interpretation theories, like this is the pre-incarnate Christ going forth. And what does Jesus do? He fights our battles for us. He is our king, right? So he fights the battles on our behalf, slays the enemies of death and sin. This angel is going before them. Angel also, remember, angel means messenger. So like reading the original text, you'd also read this as I'm sending my messenger before you. God is also saying my name is in him, which kind of like hints at this mystery. It's not a revelation of the Trinity or of the pre-incarnate Christ or the second person of the Trinity, but it's not like it's not the craziest interpretation to have or like meditation to bring to this passage. But if you listen attentively to his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. When my angel goes before you and brings you into the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I blot them out, you shall not bow down to their gods. So I'm going to blot them out. God's the one who's promising to blot out these pagans. Why is God doing this? It's because they're bad pagans. So just one brief thing about how messed up these people are. We know that in sacrificial rituals, you eat the victim that sacrificed. Okay? In the land of Canaan, they worship Baal. And part of the worship of Baal is that you would offer up infants and you would feed them to Baal in his gaping mouth, which had like a bonfire in he was like a furnace of an idol. And so they'd offer up newborn infants into Baal's mouth as a sacrifice, as a holocaust, as a burnt offering. All right, well, if the custom of every pagan sacrifice and every sacrifice in every religion is that you also eat the victim, you might start to think that, maybe these pagans' societies should be eradicated. Maybe they've had their chance and they're actually really, really wicked. So they can either wisen up and circle around back to Yahweh, or the sins that they've been committing and the atrocities they've been committing, this is perfect justice being executed. Right? This is not genocide. This is like something really horrific being squashed out. Verse 24, you shall not bow down to their gods. All right, it's going to be a temptation for Israel. Nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their pillars in pieces. You shall serve the Lord your God, and I will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you. None shall cast her young or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my terror before you and will throw into confusion all the people against whom you shall come. and I'll make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out Hivite, Canaanite, and Hittite from before you. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you, until you are increased and possess the land. And I will set your boundaries from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines. You can make a note to Genesis 15. This is going back to the promise of Abraham. I'm going to give you this land. The boundaries are going to be from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, from the wilderness of the Euphrates. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them or with their gods. You cannot make a treaty with these people when you come in. Why? Because when you make a covenant with someone, you are swearing an oath by each other's gods. That was the custom. So because the custom is, if you want to go make peace with the Canaanites and even submit them, and you're going to make a covenant with each other, you're going to have to swear by Baal. Or you're going to have to recognize their oath to Baal. And that is engaging in polytheism, and that is not to be permitted. So that's why you cannot make a covenant with these people or with their gods. Verse 33, they shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. Why do you got to drive with these people? Because you're going to fall into polytheism. And the worst thing you can do in life is polytheism. That is objectively the gravest sin, is a sin directly against God. Chapter 24. And he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship afar off. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with them. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord, and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Framing device, back to chapter 19, verse 8. It opened up the giving of the 10 Commandments. God has given his law. He's spoken. We're now entering a new phase of the story. And Israel is reaffirming that they are entering into this covenant. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord. All right. Hence, you get some of the internal text about Moses as author of these texts. Okay. And he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the sons of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Who are these young men? It's those firstborn sons. All right. He sent the firstborn sons, these young men, most likely. Can't say definitively, but if you've been paying attention, there's an emphasis on the firstborn being consecrated. So they're fulfilling this priestly role. Verse 6, and Moses took sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he threw against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it upon the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you in accordance of all these words. So the covenant of the Old Testament, the old law, it's ratified in the blood of a sacrifice, and the blood is sprinkled on the people, and through the blood, they're told, behold the blood of the covenant, you're now ratified, right? Because you've agreed. You've spoken your word, all the Lord has spoken we will do. All right, so obviously there's some foreshadowing here. Or you go say, like, the same thing happens when Christ ratifies the new covenant. He ratifies the new covenant in his blood as well. Verse 9. All right, so everyone's ratified. They're in covenant. They've been baptized, so to speak, in this blood. The original word for baptize, it's like plunge, immerse, but it can also be a sprinkling. So baptizen is the Greek translation in the Septuagint of what happened here. They're like baptizen in the blood of this bull. Then Moses, verse 9, then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up and they saw the God of Israel. Whoa. Okay, so we got to keep track of this timeline. God tells them, don't come up the mountain. Moses goes up. The covenant is ratified. Now that the covenant's ratified, they're invited up to the mountain. And Moses, his brother, and the 70 elders, they go up and they see God face to face. What are they going to do? All right. And there was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief of men of the people of Israel. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. So they go up, they see God, and they have a feast with him. They have a meal with God. They're in covenant, and now they're having a meal with him. Really important that you highlight this, that you're keeping track of the fact that, all right, they're in covenant, seeing God, and having a meal with him. Yes, Ashron.
It's the same thing with Abraham when he ate with God.
Yeah, it's like their righteousness is akin to that of Abraham. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. And then also you can point to the foreshadowing of the coming of the Eucharist, right? The covenant's ratified in the blood of the victim, and now they're going up and they're engaging in this meal with God, which is what the celebration of the Eucharist is. Verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the tables of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written for their instruction." So Moses rose with his servant Joshua, and Moses went up into the mountain of God, and he said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we come to you again. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a cause, let him go to them." Yeah.